He is an excellent friend of San Antonio, excellent representative on behalf of the state of Texas, and it is my honor to introduce to you Congressman Michael McCaul.
Well, thank you, Marlo. I do have a special connection to San Antonio, and I married a gal from San Antonio, as a matter of fact. Her name was Linda Mays at the time, and met her at the Air and Space Museum up here. I was working for Justice Department, and I said, "What are you doing, San Antonio? What are you doing up in Washington?" "Well, you know, I'm an oceanographer. I work for Naval Intelligence." I said, "Well, what do you do for them?" "Well, I track Soviet submarines." I said, "Wow, you know, I've never dated somebody that tracks Soviet submarines. You want to go out with me?" So, and you know, the rest is history. Now we have 5 children. The one thing Marlo didn't mention is we have 5 teenagers. So when it comes to Homeland Security issues, on a personal side, we call it domestic terrorism in my house, and it's always a great inspiration and challenge at the same time. But I just got back from the RSA conference, which is the big high-tech cybersecurity. About 20,000 people gave the keynote address and got their award you know, in terms of the efforts we made in the Congress, in my committee, to advance the cause of cybersecurity. And we can talk about a lot of issues. I mean, Brady got to talk about how he's going to cut your taxes, and he gets the easier job. I get to talk about the wall, the executive order on travel ban. But I do want to focus on cyber initially, just because San Antonio has such great promise and opportunity. I think there are so many cyber companies in San Antonio. The Cyber Command being in San Antonio, a perfect fit for that. Will Hurd and I worked very closely. You'll have to excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, but we worked very closely last Congress to pass out of the House a consortium between the University of Texas and UTSA, collaborating with the Cyber Command to create a consortium. And I think that'd be, in terms of development of job creation in San Antonio on a high-tech level. I live in Austin, which is a very high-tech city, but there are just as many cyber startup companies in San Antonio as well. And we thought that would be a great marriage between both the universities and the 2 cities moving forward. Hopefully this year we'll get it passed and signed into law. We'll be doing a lot on cybersecurity. I did pass last Congress the Cybersecurity Act, which is the information sharing piece to providing liability protection when we share malicious codes from the federal government to the private sector and then private to private. If you're not familiar with cyber, I hope I'm not boring you to death, but if I could tell you what the threat level is, I think you'd find this more interesting, and that is we have more intellectual property stolen by cyber. I think Keith Alexander, former NSA director, said it was the largest transfer of wealth in human history. And a lot of it's outside the United States. All of our intellectual property, our creativity is being stolen by a lot of countries, particularly China, Russia, and Iran is getting pretty good at this game as well. We had 20 million security clearances stolen from the federal government in 2016, including mine. And now China has them, probably the greatest act of espionage, and yet no consequence to that bad behavior. I know, going back to my 5 teenagers, if you have bad behavior and there are no consequences, guess what happens? The bad behavior will continue. It's not rocket science, but we have a world where we really have no international norms or standards or rules of the game. It's still kind of a wild west, and so in terms of proportionate response to an act of cyber espionage or warfare or interference in our elections. What is the consequence to that? Russia has gotten very good at cyber. Not only their organized criminal activity with Target and Home Depot, stealing all that credit card information, but they're very good at cyber warfare now. and that's the ability to shut things down. We have great cyber offensive capability. You've probably seen, if you've been by the Cyber Command in San Antonio, you have a glimpse of some of the capability that we have. But we don't want our foreign adversaries with that capability. Russia shut down Estonia, parts of Ukraine. We are worried that they have their fingerprints on things like our SCADA systems, which would be our power grids, and possibly the Chinese that they could exercise when necessary. So it's a very high stakes game. It's becoming, I look at the ISIS threat that I've been focused on intensely in my tenure as chairman. The number 2 guy at the FBI is leaving. I just had a meeting with him to thank him for what he's done the past 6 years, where the threat environment's gotten really high as the caliphate has grown in Iraq and Syria. The foreign fighter threat, but also their ability also to use the internet to spread their propaganda, not just in Iraq and Syria, but globally to join the fight. Now the message is not so much join the fight as we're making some military progress against them over there. Their messaging now is stay where you are and kill the kuffar, the non-believer, in their own backyard. And that was the message that the New York bomber, when we got his bloodstained diary, it talked about that specifically. He says that was my inspiration, coming from the leaders who are very effective, on the internet. And so these are all sort of components of my world. Getting back to the Russia thing, though, I do think it's a very timely remark. I don't care what party got hacked into, but the idea of a foreign adversary hacking into any political party and having any influence over our elections, I think is unacceptable. And we need to have a consequence to that. We will have congressional oversight, into this matter. But I don't think, I think everyone would agree. They've done this for a long time. In China, I prosecuted a case when I was at Justice involving money from the Director of Chinese Intelligence into the then Clinton campaign. But they have a new tool now, and it's a cyber tool, and it's a very effective tool to engage not just with intellectual property, espionage, cyber warfare, but now also our elections. And so I know maybe this doesn't have a whole lot to do with the chamber per se, but I find it a somewhat timely interest. A lot of you may be concerned about what does this wall mean? And that's a very good question. I had a hearing on this, and I asked the new secretary, what does this wall, what's it going to look like? And I've had discussions with him. We had a panel of sheriffs, border sheriffs as well, and Steve McCraw, who's the Homeland Security advisor in Texas and also DPS director. It's really a physical barrier, multi-layered defense, but also utilizing technology and aviation assets. Henry Cuellar is a very dear friend of mine. We were over in Afghanistan talking to General Allen, and we saw this blimp in the sky, and we said, what is that? What is that thing? And he said, that's my border security between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we asked him, what are you going to do when we withdraw from Afghanistan? Well, we're just going to leave these aerostats over here. So Henry and I came up in a bipartisan way, a good idea, and that was to redeploy these aerostats to the southwest border. That's the kind of thing that and a lot of other technologies out there with respect to whether it's drones or other aviation assets, that's what we really need. When people ask me, what would be your number one goal? Well, it's to get control, of course, but how do you do that? You have to have 100% visibility. And like anything in the threat world, if you can't see where the threats are or see where they're coming in, you're really operating from a deficit with a blind spot because you don't know where the threats are coming from. And if you don't know that, then you really can't stop that threat. And so we want a smart border. Texas will have a voice in this because I think we're in a very unique spot, and I made it very clear. So did Will Hurd. He had a great Q&A with the secretary. I'd advise you to recommend you look at it. But he went through some of the natural barriers with the river and the Rio Grande. So we from Texas understand you can't build a wall in a river. It's just not, it doesn't make good sense. You're not going to build on the U.S. side because you're going to block property owners from the river, and you're also going to cede sovereignty to the cartels. And so that doesn't make sense. And structurally, it doesn't make sense to build it in the river. That's where you need the eyes in the sky and the technology piece, and make this a smart border. So I'll be traveling. I've been down there quite a bit. I'll be going down there with the secretary as well to kind of explain. We understand it, and I always like to get people that haven't been down to the border down there. They talk a big game, but they're from Pennsylvania and New York. And it's like, why don't you come down with me and come see it? And then you'll understand it, and then you'll know best how to secure it. And so I know there's a lot of other things I could talk about, but I don't know if you want to have a Q&A. The last thing, when I had the FBI, last thing we talked about was, and this goes to cyber, is encryption. It's becoming a bigger and bigger issue for federal law enforcement. And, of course, ISIS has tapped into this ability to an encrypted app on your phone. They can talk to each other, and we can't see it. And we can't see what they're saying. And same thing with the border. If you can't see the threat or the communication, it's hard to stop that. I was a federal prosecutor for many years, and if you can't capture that communication, it poses a real problem. And that's a great challenge we're trying to deal with, in Congress as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to the audience.